Hi, my name's Caria, and I am a survivor of the Las Vegas massacre. I had moved to Las Vegas about 6 months prior to the event, and my friend Heather Sallin was coming into town because she worked or owns a company called Boot Rocks that she asked me to help her at a Route 91 concert festival for 3 days. And I was really looking forward to it. I hadn't seen Heather in about 10 years. And I told her, yes, I'd love to do that. I had never been to a country music festival, and it was kind of exciting to just get to know that whole genre of people in the country. It was almost like going to a foreign country for me watching the festival. I took a ton of pictures, and I met the most amazing, kind people. I was just amazed that there was a 3-day concert with so many people drinking, and how friendly everyone was, that there was no fighting. Everyone was adorned with American flags, and just it was such a pleasurable experience. The people were so kind, and working there, we got to meet so many of them because there weren't that many vendors. So every single day we'd meet all these people, and I'm kind of a very outgoing social person, so I got to know a lot of people and where they are from, and they were from all over the world. There was a couple from Switzerland that were there for their anniversary, and people from Germany, a ton of Canadians, lots of Californians, which is where I'm from. So it was just very, very, a very good time. It was not even like working, even though we were there for 12-hour days. At the end of the last day, we were wrapping up. I called my husband to tell him we were going to be home shortly, and I walked down to the concert. We were really close to the stage where our booth was, and I walked down to kind of see Jason Aldean. I'd periodically look out just because I didn't know any of the artists. So I walked in to the concert, and I looked around. Right before that, Big and Rich had been playing, and they had played the Stars Spangled Banner, or the... I can't remember exactly what it was right now off the top of my head, but it was the most patriotic thing I'd ever seen. So I kept being really interested in going in and seeing all the people, and I walked down. I was listening to the music, and I heard 3 pops, and I got all excited because I love fireworks, and I'm like, oh yay, it's fireworks. And I ran into it, and I looked around, and everyone looked a little confused. And then a lot of this part gets a little confusing to me because my brain hasn't really compartmentalized the actual sequence. But what I think happened was I ran back to the booth and said it was fireworks, and everyone was saying, that's not fireworks. And I said, no, it's fireworks. So I ran back, and people were dropping, and I saw somebody get hit, and people were down on the ground. And I was still in my brain, and this is what I'm trying to work out in therapy right now, why I was having such a hard time accepting what was going on. And then I kept hearing da 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 da. And I ran back to the booth, and Heather, the look in her eyes, my friend that I was with, was pure terror. And we ran behind, we had a makeshift like retail bar, and we jumped behind it, and I got down like this, and 3 or 4 people jumped down with me, and then Heather grabbed me, and she's like, we have to go. We have to get out of here now. And I was frozen. I did not want to go anywhere, because in my head I was like, you get down, you tuck, you don't move. That's, I don't know if it was drills when I was little when you get under your desk, but I didn't want to move, and I thought I was in a safe place because I was down and under behind a bar. I didn't want to get up. Heather grabbed me. We started running, but somehow, and this is the hardest thing that I'm dealing with in therapy right now, I was arguing with the situation in my head, so I ran back into it, and I was like, no, this is not happening, you know? And so there's more rounds going off. I lost my friend. I'm looking around, and I was just like almost frozen, and I turned around to run, and I tripped or fell or got pushed. I'm not exactly sure what happened, and I started getting trampled, and I got really hurt from my left knee, and my lower back is where I remember it hitting. And at some point while I was down, I had my phone in my hand, and I had hit call, and because I just talked to my husband to tell him that we were going to be coming home soon. And I called him while I was getting up, and I started panicking. I couldn't get my breath. I have asthma, and I had started becoming unable to breathe. And I called my husband, and I'm like, where do I go? What do I do? And I was like, I couldn't get my breath, and I'm like, where do I go? What do I do? And I started running, and this is what's very strange. By this, the gunfire was still going, and it just was going and going. And at this point, I think I was making my way out of the venue. I have zero memory, no matter what I do. From the time of I was trampled while I was running straight out towards Giles Street towards the airport. I was on the phone with my husband, and all I remember is running, seeing people that were hit on the right, on the left, in the front, and not knowing whether they had been hit before. I mean, now I don't know whether they had been hit before inside, or if we were actually getting shot at while we were running. But I have zero memory of those 2 blocks at all. I can't remember. I've retraced my steps. I was totally by myself. I couldn't see anyone, and I was just kept on screaming at my husband, where do I go? What do I do? Where do I go? What do I do? That's all I kept saying. And he's like, breathe, breathe. And then my phone died. And I was screaming, you know. And I look up, and this lady, who now I know her name, it was Denai Padilla, she's like, come with me. My boyfriend's a Marine. And she grabbed my hand. And I was like, oh. Because everyone was going different places, and they looked like they knew where they were going or what they were doing, and I was so lost. And so I grabbed them. Her boyfriend, who's a staff sergeant in the Marines, his name's Chase Hunter, grabbed my other hand, and we started running. And we ran as far as we could into where there was a fence in an office building, and I was terrified to go back there because you couldn't run any further. And I was like, we're going to get trapped here, you know, because the fire was still happening. There was nowhere to go. The fence ended to the airport, and there was barbed wire around it. But there was like what I thought was a storage container that night, but since I found out they're like wooden pallets. Anyways, we all jumped behind this structure, and there was like all this metal, and we had to like get down like this. Chase Hunter saw a couple other women that were hysterical. One of them had a broken leg. We didn't know whether she was shot, but he went out and got them and brought them back. And we stayed down there, and for some reason, Chase was pretty sure that the fire had been coming from one person up high. As a Marine, he got us all calmed down. I started breathing, He called my husband to tell him I was alive. So I felt like, I started calming down. I started getting, okay, what's next? I got a little bit of breath. I was still barely breathing from my asthma. My inhaler had been left inside the venue. We were bedded up against the airport. I didn't know where my friend was, and we just sat there. The fire had stopped finally, and I remember just thinking, somebody get this bastard. Why is this going on so long? I mean, it just sounded like it was coming from everywhere, and that every turn that you were going to take, somebody was going to come out with a gun. It sounded like we were being attacked from all sides. We were bedded up against the airport, and I happened to look behind, and I see my friend Heather running across the tarmac, and I just screamed. I'm like, Heather! And she saw me, and it was so frustrating because we were like separated by this chain link fence, and we couldn't get to each other because there was raised barbed wire on it. And she didn't have her phone, but the people she's with had a pen, and I had no way to contact anyone because my phone was dead. So she took a pen and wrote my husband's name down on her shorts and started talking to them. My husband had gotten into his car and was at the Mandalay Bay probably within 3 minutes after the shooting stopped. So at that point, Heather and I had determined that we were going to try to meet at the MGM, and to try to go along the fence, there was a building, and meet on the other side, and then go to meet at the MGM. So the women that Chase was helping, one of them was really injured, and she was so hysterical that I was kind of afraid to stay there because she was so loud, and we thought that there were other shooters everywhere. So I left them and started hiding along this building towards the MGM. I get to the end of, I think it was Reno Avenue, and I look at the airport, and there was nowhere for Heather to get out to meet me. And there was police officers everywhere, and I still couldn't breathe. By this time, there was ambulance station, and I ran over there to see if I could get an inhaler, but there was just bodies everywhere. There's maybe 15 bodies there. I was not going to bother them with that, obviously. And I didn't have a phone because my phone was dead, and I just started going towards MGM. I'm like, she'll figure it out. We'll make it there. And then I'm walking towards that way, and then all of a sudden they said, there's another shooter. And so these guys grabbed myself and this other girl off the sidewalk and grabbed us and dragged us into Coco's restaurant, and shut the doors and took all the tables and threw them against all the windows. And it turns out that they were off-duty police officers from LA, and we dove into the booths, and at this point I could barely breathe, and I was just screaming, does anyone have an inhaler? And someone did. Thank God. So I was at Coco's restaurant there. It was eerily quiet. That's what I remember. There was about 40 of us. There was 2 other people that had been shot there. A lot of people were banged up. I was able to find someone that had a charger for my phone. I remember getting my first hit of battery on my phone and calling my son and telling him I didn't know if I was safe, because we didn't know whether we were safe at that point. We thought that there were shooters all over. We didn't know there was one. There were people that hanging on the door to try to get in the restaurant, and they wouldn't let them in because we didn't know whether they were active shooters, and there were other survivors trying to get to safety, and that was really hard to hear. That's like one of the things that really haunts me, is just not knowing that how afraid those people were, there was nowhere else to go to be able to get inside somewhere. But they didn't know whether they were shooters or not, so they wouldn't let them in. We stayed there, and by this time, I was able to get some charge on my phone and call my husband, and he was talking to Heather, and he was able to get to Heather, who had also had like 4 other survivors with them. I was on lockdown, I couldn't go anywhere, and so he was able to bring them back to our house. And then he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave me. But I told him to do it, and I told him to get everyone out as fast as they could, because we didn't know. I really didn't even want him down there. Our son was home alone. I didn't know whether he was going to get injured. I sat under the table with these women from Utah, and one of them had cigarettes. I don't even smoke, but we all just started smoking cigarettes inside the restaurant. It was, I don't know why I'm thinking about that, but it was just kind of a bonding moment with these women that I'd never met before. And they had nowhere to go. They were staying at the Mandalay, and I knew my husband was coming back down to get me, so I invited them back to our house. And they were with a large group of people from Utah, and they came back to our house. Their friend was Heather Alvarado. She didn't make it, and they lost one of their friends. They didn't know that at the time. I remember getting in the car, and we squeezed 4 people in the back. I mean, we had 5 people. My husband drove about 100 miles an hour to get us back to Summerlin, where we live. And getting home, and there was the other 5 people that my husband had brought, and my whole house was covered with people, other survivors, and one of them had shrapnel in his leg, and there was blood, and everyone was just like this, and the TV was on, and we went out and sat in the yard, and just, I finally saw Heather, and I was just, we've been through a lot in our lives, and we were just like, we just didn't even have to talk. We just looked at each other in each other's eyes and just went, oh my God. And I remember all of us talking about, like, this is going to keep happening. This is going to keep happening. And, like, we didn't know how many people at the time had made it. And I remember that the death toll kept going up. I didn't sleep all night. I didn't sleep, actually, for that first week, I don't think, or eat. I didn't know how to process this. I was in total shock. But from my past, you know, I was a social worker, and I knew I had to do some things. So I started doing just research on gun violence in this country. I remember when Columbine happened. I remembered where I was. I had just had my first son, and I remember being terrified and living in this small town, thinking that could have happened there. And I remember that as a distinct time in history, and obviously I totally remember it now. But I knew that I had to do something. I started researching everything, and I came across the Brady campaign, and I started reaching out. I made donations, and I started looking for a local chapter in Vegas, and there wasn't one. So I started reaching out to whoever I could in the campaign, and just said, hey, listen, I'm interested. I want to help. I want to do something. I knew that was the only way that I was going to be able to heal, because there's no way that I can leave this world like this for my kids. I got a hold of them. They were very kind. They reached back out, and you know, I'd go in and out of not being able to function and functioning. There was times where I wasn't getting out of bed. I started going to church, something I've never done. My parents were hippies. I never really had religion. But one of the other survivors actually brought me to a church, and it was the only time I felt better for some reason. And so I started going to church. And I was getting ready to go. I think it was less than a month after the shooting, I was getting ready to go. Someone said, turn on the news. And it was about Sutherland Seat, the Springs. And like all the progress that I had made when I was finally getting out of bed and starting to do stuff, I was like, I just started shaking, and I couldn't even, but obviously I didn't go to church, but I got back in bed and I was glued to the TV, and I just started freaking out about this world we live in. I called the pastor at the church I went to. And I said, I'm sorry, I want to know what your security measures are. I was really finding like this place was the biggest comfort since this happened, and I need to know what your security measures are, because I don't even feel like I can leave my house, much less go to church, since nothing's safe anymore. And I left that as a voicemail. So 2 days later, this is a huge church. The pastor called me, and he told me what their security measures were. And I can't even believe that we live in a day and an age, and I'm not going to tell you what they are, but he shared them with me, but they're secretive. But there's definitely, they have a lot of military and law enforcement that are dispersed through there, and they actually have a 4-layer system so that something doesn't happen in that church. That's the world we live in, where we can't go to church or concerts or schools without getting bullets put in us. Anyhow, he's like, how are you healing? And I said, I feel like I have to do something. And he said this prayer for me. And I mean, you have to remember, I've never been a Christian before. I've never been to church. And I don't know even really exactly what he said. Basically something like, please God, help this woman to heal, and try to create some awareness and safety in this world about gun violence. Was kind of the gist I got. I was crying. My phone starts beeping in on the other side, and I answered it, and it was Sheikah Hamilton. And we were talking, and she asked me to head up the local chapter in Vegas for the Brady campaign right when I got off the phone from this prayer. And I just felt like it was, okay, God, I kind of get this message. I felt like it was more than a coincidence. I had to do this. I didn't really pick it, but I had to do this. And so I told Sheikah, what can I do? I'm all in. And I haven't done it very fast. I mean, a lot of times I have to sleep a lot. I'm still healing. I've spoken with the Brady campaign, and I've specifically with Robert Disney, and talked to him for hours about this and about the pain that we're all going through and about what can we do. All I know is that this is helping me heal, and that if I don't do something, honestly, that's not even an option. It's not an option to not do anything. I have to do something. Coming to Washington, D.C., and getting my other survivors involved and watching my friends take this step has been the biggest step I've taken towards healing. It's been empowering, and I know we have a huge road ahead of us, but I feel like coming to Washington, D.C. right now and being able to talk to these legislators and knowing there's people on our sides, has been the biggest healing step that I could take. And it's the only way I can sleep at night. And it's the only way I can look at my kids in their eyes and know that I have to do something. And hopefully there's going to be impact. There's been some impact with me and others, and we're going to have to. I mean, there's that saying, be the change that you want to see in the world. And it makes more sense to me now more than ever. I didn't ask to be a gun violence prevention advocate.